I guess at the time it was really a really difficult time for you guys to like be able to put out certain games on these like budgets and timelines. And I know I talked about this with, say for instance, the Donkey Kong game that Gary Kitchen was working on. And I remember Dan was saying how he couldn't get the girders to be, on a slant, for instance, and, things like that. And it just programming challenge.
Well, actually,
all around.
he not only could he did, excuse me, but the brief funny story behind that is when Gary reached out to Activision and said that, hey, I on the East Coast write Atari 2600 games, and the gentleman he spoke to, who was our VP of product development, finally believed him. And when Gary said, I'm doing Donkey Kong, and he said, are you there in New Jersey tomorrow? I'm flying out. And the joke is Gary had the game running without the tilted girders, and Tom Lopez, who it was at the time when we were done with our meeting in New Jersey, walked out of our basement office and glanced over at the screen and looked at Gary and said, if you worked for Activision, those would be slanted. And I remember that was on a Friday, and by Monday morning, Gary had rewritten everything and had them slanted. So it's Donkey Kong. I know a lot of people say, why does it only have 2 levels and whatnot? Gary fit everything he could into the 4K ROM. They're the 2 levels that everyone sees most in the game. Yeah, and frankly, given the space and the time that he had to write that for Christmas that year, he did a phenomenal job and put as much of it in there as he could, because it was certainly a real crunch to get that into the cartridge.
Well, and in fact, he was doing it for a client, and that client looking at how am I going to make money.
Right.
And that client said, people are going to buy this because it says Donkey Kong on it, right? Are they going to buy it because it has 4 levels? They're going to buy more because it has 4 levels than if it has 2 levels? And he looked at the rest of his management crew, and nobody said that there was any chance. So basically, he was going to make every bit as much money with 2 levels as he would with 4. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to spring for the extra cost of the larger ROM.
Right.
Yeah. And one of the things that I like to always kind of debate people on, and I know we talked about this, Dan, when we did our live chat, was the concept or the notion that these games were intentionally done terribly to push the Colecovision and its version of Donkey Kong. And I remember actually doing a kind of a questionnaire on the one of the Intellivision groups. Does anybody know who actually programmed the Intellivision version of Donkey Kong? Because that one is often given a really bad rap. I mean, it was my favorite game. It always has been. I had that game when I was a kid. I was really excited to have it, and it's always been a special game for me. But at the same time, I know a lot of people really say it's like the worst game ever, or it's no good. And of course, almost without fail, there's going to be a comment at some point where someone said Coleco intentionally made those games bad so they can sell their ColecoVision. But in my opinion, that just seems like that would just be bad business practice. Like
it's one of those urban myths that's absolutely not true. I think Gary did the best job anyone could on the Atari version. I don't know who coded the Intellivision version, but certainly no one working with Coleco or other companies then would try to do a bad version intentionally to highlight another game system. So it's just one of those crazy myths that float around.
Yeah, well, that was my thought, because I just can't imagine any company for any reason intentionally putting out a bad product with their branding on it, their name on it. Like you guys were Activision at one point, even with Audacity, you're not going to put out a product that looks terrible for any reason. So I just can't, and even just being a programmer to like intentionally make a game bad, I just can't see that happening. I can see maybe they weren't given enough budget, time, or whatever. Maybe they've given only a small cart size or something. I can kind of get that they might have, said we need it done in X amount of time. Kind of like the whole ET thing with Howard Scott Warshaw being given, a couple weeks to make ET? which I still say is a brilliant game. I've always thought that game was amazing. So it's amazing that people give it such flack and call it the reason the video game crash or whatever. But you guys were always on a time crunch and a budget, right? Like that was just the reality of
it's a business, and certainly companies that you work for want to are willing to invest in a game, but they certainly are looking for their opportunity to get a return on that investment. So clearly, many games besides just Donkey Kong and Howard's ET were victims of people above the designers needing to get a game shipped in time. And primarily back then, I know for Gary, for the year that Donkey Kong came out, it was Christmas, which was and is an immovable selling season that, you hope to get products out for at retail, because that's when people purchase the games.
Yeah, for sure. Once Christmas is over and you get into the springtime, and it's not going to be, the big seller. I mean, I think Nintendo might have changed things around with that, but I could totally see that there was a time crunch, and getting a game done on time was pretty interesting. Aaron F. there is saying he traded his Atari Pac-Man within a few hours of purchasing with a kid down the street for 3 Activision games.
That was a pretty good deal.
Well, my guess is one or two of them were probably Dave's.
Yeah, and I don't honestly. I never had a problem with Pac-Man either. I remember playing it. I borrowed an Atari from a friend, because that's how it was. At least where I grew up, everybody kind of had their own system. Like I knew somebody had an Atari, someone had a Colecovision, someone had a whatever. So sometimes we would trade stuff with each other. And I remember borrowing an Atari and playing Pac-Man for the first time, and I didn't have a problem with it. So I don't know. I guess it was maybe some of the people who played it in the arcade, or maybe the older people who played it in the arcade and were expecting to see that exactly on the Atari, which is a little ambitious, don't you think? To be able to think of that back in the day, you would get anything resembling the arcade. I mean, today, sure. I mean,
as Dave will tell you, because he was there, the 2600 was created to bring arcade games into the home. That was Atari's plan. That was their strategy, to be able to have a home system that played their arcade games. And certainly that was the initial intent. So Pac-Man being on it isn't so strange. It is certainly a very difficult programming challenge to bring that game on the system because of the number of sprites that is required at any given time.